Folks, I'm Nick Bernardo, your host of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. If you're east of the Rocky Mountains here in the US, good afternoon. Good morning to those out west, and hello to anyone joining us from the far corners of the earth or watching online in the future. Today is Wednesday, March 20th, 2024. This series is brought to you by MyGovWatch. With a curated white glove approach, MyGovWatch delivers leads in more than 200 industries using AI best practices at double the rate of free government tools and at a fraction of the cost of legacy websites. Big government contracts don't start with a solicitation, but all roads lead to one, and your budget for hearing about RFPs does not have to be thousands of dollars per year. Start your 14-day trial today. And so, folks, I am super excited about today's session. Typically, we have a co-host on with us on MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable. This is what I've been calling a very special session of MyGovWatch Live, the B2G Roundtable, because we just announced the release of a major PR initiative in terms of some research we did around government buyers. And I'm just going to pull up where I will share what I'm talking about here. Let's find it. So this is a press release that we just issued on Monday, the 18th. And basically what we're going to do on this session today, folks, we're going to do two things. I am definitely going to be talking to anyone who's with us on this session about your specific questions. I know I called all of you. I spoke with many of you about specific topics that you would like to talk about. So we're going to talk about those things. And in between, I'm going to show you 6 or 7 PowerPoint slides with just some sneak preview data points that are in the survey. So the promo that we're doing is anyone who downloads a copy of the survey on the same day that, or anybody that starts a free trial of our website on the same day that they download a copy of the survey, a 2-week free trial becomes a 3-week free trial. And if you do it within 4 hours, download the survey within 4 hours of starting a free trial with us, we can extend it to a 4th week. And we'll honor that for anyone who may be with us now who is already in a free trial. So just shoot me a note after the session and we'll get your trial extended, no problem. So yeah, so what we did back in January, we sent out tens of thousands of emails to buyer email addresses. So what we've been doing for the past 7 or 8 years is aggregating not only which RFP leads are out there, but also contact information for government buyers. So that would be anything from .gov, .mil, .edu, basically anything that is government at the federal, state, and local level. So we realized we had this massive amount of data. And what prompted this also is that from time to time, people will ask, whether it be during the onboarding process or it may come up in these sessions that we have, they'll say, well, should I bid on contracts if the buyer doesn't know who I am or if I didn't do a lot of pre-marketing? And there are lots of different ways that that question gets answered in the consulting community. But typically, there's something I like to call the gold standard, where what you want to do is you want to try to do some pre-marketing to the extent that you're able to do it, right? All things being equal, certainly you would like the buyer to know who you are before a bid process. If you're bidding on a solicitation, that's always a good thing, and I would never discount that. But in my personal history, I have lots of anecdotes as someone who had a previous career being responsible for bids and RFPs, first at a company in my 20s, and then as a consultant in my late 20s, 30s, and early 40s, where I found example after example when I thought through different clients that I had helped over the years of people who would win RFPs at the local, state, and at the federal level where they didn't know anyone. They hadn't done any pre-marketing, but they had something of value that the government needed, and they had amazing references or good references that were, I would say, corporate or private sector references. So I was trying to reconcile my personal experience and my anecdotes of knowing that I had helped companies win contracts through the bid process where they told me flat out they didn't know anyone there. They were just bidding blindly. and reconciling those anecdotes with what the consulting community talks about in terms of pre-marketing. And so we came up with the idea of sending a survey to tens of thousands of government buyers. We got lots and lots of responses back, over 100 in fact. And I'm just going to pull up the first slide. And before I do that, let me just see who we have on here. I just want to just tell everyone in the audience here that if you raise your hand, I will definitely bring you on. This is an intimate gathering. We don't have more than 20, 25 people with us right now. So if you raise your hand, then I will definitely bring you on. If we spoke today or yesterday, or traded some text messages, I will definitely bring you on. But please raise your hand to indicate that you'd be interested in jumping in with audio and video in the first half hour here, and we will get to you. So I would just encourage you to do that while I go through some of this stuff. So the first thing that I would like to do is go into PowerPoint, and let's do this. Let's go into full screen mode. And we're just going to jump right in, and we're going to talk about who was involved in this, or who was invited to participate in the survey. And so the participants could have been any number of folks. At MyGovWatch, we track 21 different types of buyers. So that would be a list of anything from the federal government down to the smallest school districts. But ultimately, what we had to do, just for the sake of presenting the data a little bit more cleanly, we classified every respondent as either federal, state, and local. And here is who responded to the survey. So about half of the folks who responded to the survey and participated in this effort were local, and that could be anything from, a school district, municipality, a county. Could also be a utility district, a sanitation district, a community college, a local healthcare facility that happens to be government run. So that's the 50% on the green part of the pizza. And then we had about 21% of people were state. And we can infer all this from the email addresses of the respondents who came back to us with responses to the survey. And about 29% of the folks who responded were federal. So it really, really ran the gamut of different folks in government. I see we have a question. I'm not sure of the question. So we had over 100 responses. I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for. So if you have an additional follow-up question, we can answer that live. And so knowing that we had this pool of respondents, we wanted to ask them, how many years of experience do you have in making procurement decisions? And I want to make a distinction here. So the folks that are in our database, they are disproportionately buying larger ticket items, right? So there's a lot of government purchasing that happens with a P card or on, the government's credit at very low dollar amounts, typically under $10,000. So the folks who are in our database who participated in the survey are disproportionately involved in larger ticket items, if you will, over $10,000 at the local level, certainly over $1 million or 10 or even $100 million at the state and federal level. So in terms of years of experience, here's how it breaks out. And it looks like we have a gremlin in our PowerPoint. I don't know what that extra rhombus is, but it looks like about 13% of the folks are newbies to procurement. Certainly, there's more than 10% who've been involved in bid decisions for 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years at 19%, but the sweet spot seems to be the 10 to 20 year range of years of experience, and that's where the largest segment of participants in the survey came from. Then we wanted people to express their procurement experience in dollars. So we asked them to select one or more categories in which they have been involved in purchasing decisions through the bid process. And realize when I show you these numbers, a respondent was able to select more than one item. So these will not total 100 because a person responding could select more than one of these options. So the smallest cohort, people who have been involved in purchasing decisions over $1 billion, that was a tiny fraction of who responded, 2.7%. Folks who have been involved in purchasing decisions over 100 million, under $1 billion, 21.3. From 10 million to 100 million, you can see we're going down the ladder, so to speak. About a third of every respondent, or of all respondents, have been involved in that dollar range for procurements of those sizes. About half involved in $1 million to $10 million range purchases, and that would certainly probably be as broad as the spectrum of federal, state, and local. There's a lot of bids happening, certainly in that range at every level of government. Same with $100,000 to $1 million, about 52%, about 50% at 10,000 to 100,000, and just under 50% of the folks have been involved in purchasing decisions under $10,000. So what I want to do is I just want to stop there, and I want to go to our audience. Now, I know that several of you I spoke with in leading up to this event, and I know that Colton Jones, I know we spoke. What I'd like to do is ask you to join us, and let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that that we communicated about a couple weeks ago. So, Colton, I'm going to promote you to a panelist. Okay, and if Colton can't join us, I'm going to look for Jackson. Jackson, I know we were trading some text messages. Let's see if I can have you jump on with us, Jackson. And Jessica, we're going to be coming to you. I know there's some others here who wanted to participate, but Jessica, I would just tell you that you're probably next. So Jackson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How you doing, Nick?
Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. For the sake of those who don't know, what do you do and where are you joining us from?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me one quick second. So I'm joining from Colorado, living in Denver. I work at Publicis Sapient. I'm a business development manager over here. I'm fairly new actually to the team. And so this webinar definitely perked my ears in terms of building relationships, and the book that was included was definitely interesting. Where we sit is we work with a lot of state and local across the US. I'm mostly focused in the Mountain West region, and we really focus on impacts. We do a lot of digital consulting, making our tech partners in the world really sing, including Salesforce and various partners like that. And our mission is mostly to work with innovative governments who have a large impact on day-to-day citizens and communities, making life a little bit more efficient and effective for our clients, as well as the folks that they serve.
Well, it's really interesting. And I think probably, and now let me ask this question. Are you new to sales in government, or just new to this company, or new to state and local?
Kind of all of the above. So the last about 7-8 years, I've been working in software sales, specifically more in private and in the marketing field. And then I transitioned into government sales this year. So fairly new to kind of all of it.
Okay. So far, and how long have you been in the role?
Since January.
Okay. And I'm realizing it's only been, what, 75 days maybe?
Correct, yeah.
What are you seeing as some of the differences so far?
Right. So obviously, building the relationships is quite different, right? There's not as much of the cold emailing, cold calling that works as well. So I think it's there's always background information, market information, understanding agencies and who the players are and really what they're looking for, both policy-wise, politically. A lot of that diving in is crucially important, understanding how budgets and procurement works. This is very new comparatively to other agency or other industries that I've worked in. So I would say that's definitely a big piece. And I think also being able to build trust, a foundation of that takes a little bit more time. And so having references, having other parties that can speak, to the work that we've done or the case studies that we've done and the implementation that we've done is crucially important.
Absolutely. And you're in the tech space, and unfortunately I don't know a lot about your organization, but what
Yeah.
would you say are what are the price points of your solutions? Are all of your solutions six-figure solutions, or like how does that break out? You don't have to get into specifics about products, but like do you have anything that you sell to people that's under $10,000, for example?
We do not, no.
Okay. And so are we talking over $100,000, over $1 million?
Yeah, we're typically seven figure up. That's most of the RFPs that we are responding to. So statewide departments or large city and county is typically the type of RFI or RFP that we go after.
Well, I have really good news for you. And this is not a slide because I wanted to withhold just a few things, data that's in the report to encourage people to download it. But I'm just going to tell you one of the things that didn't make it into the presentation today. The number one thing that came back when we asked people, what are some of the things that you have trouble fulfilling? Where do you have trouble getting contractors to meet the need? And overwhelmingly, when people did answer that question, they mentioned technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one person actually said they feel that the private sector is pricing government out of accessing solutions in general in technology. And
Hmm.
I wonder if you've heard any of that.
It's still early, right? I haven't only with 75 days under my belt, I haven't secured much, but I have responded to quite a few. And just the industry learning that I've done, it seems that could definitely be accurate. I mean, I think I was on a webinar recently that said, and this is specific for federal, that they're looking for more small businesses to work with, and that could be alluding to kind of what you're talking about in terms of pricing and budget. But the other edge of that sword is because the private industry and because citizens are so used to how efficient tech has made their lives, the implementation and the longevity of that is going to be crucial for those agencies. So, even maybe buying off something that might be a little less competitive in terms of budget could make their lives better in the future. I mean, I think that's going to be a really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 6 months to 2 years.
For sure, for sure. And I want to give you something that I'm not sure, I don't know if anyone on your team does this, but this is something that I like to recommend to people because a lot of the troubles that people have around doing business with government is that they're so opaque, right? It's very hard to get information. It's
Yeah.
hard to get people on the phone. Even when you get them on the phone, typically either maybe they can answer the question, maybe they can't, maybe they would say, do an open records request if you want that information. But
Right.
I wonder if anyone on your team has done this. We always recommend to people that if there is a government agency that you would like to do business with, and they are procuring something that you do not provide, so you're not bidding on the procurement, but it's definitely a tech bid. If it's adjacent to something that you sell that may become a bid later, have you considered using the Q&A process of an adjacent solicitation to learn things about something in the future for that buyer? Have you done that at all?
I haven't, but that's pretty interesting to consider. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because when we think about, how it's difficult getting information from government agencies and knowing that they have this ever expanding list of tech requirements, if there's a bid process for X, right? And you're Y and it's somehow related, you can certainly be using the Q&A process to ask questions. And that's really the only time they're forced to answer a question. And if it's tangentially related to what they're actually buying, they're probably going to answer it, and it may help you further your sales interest. So hopefully that's a benefit knowing that, but that's certainly something that we recommend to people.
No, I like that. I think any way that you can start to even show face, show interest, and ask the right questions is going to be important for the longevity, right? Name recognition. Maybe I know this is a talk a little bit about, hey, if they don't know you, but I think any way that we can make ourselves known is going to go far. So I appreciate that insight. I think that's a really interesting tactic.
Well, what I would like to invite you to do, Jackson, is stay with us. Stay with us throughout this session. Now,
Sure.
do you have a specific question now, or do you just want to kind of stew on it as we go through the rest of these slides?
I don't have. I'm interested in seeing more of the slides. I think more questions will come out. I mean, I do think just because of where my company sits, the type of deals that we are typically invested in, I'm curious to see how some of those breakdowns of those numbers in terms of a million plus or even a couple 100,000 plus deal sizes, what that looks like when they don't know us as well, when we don't have that
Okay.
foundation for a relationship. So
All right.
that's definitely what I'm interested in learning more about.
Okay, let's get right into that. So stay
Great.
with us. I mean, if you need to turn off the camera or audio, but I'm going to keep you as a panelist in case you think of a question, if that's all right.
Fair enough.
All right, let me go back to our slide deck here. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what buyer advice came back. So what we did is we asked the question, what advice would you offer as a seasoned purchasing professional to companies that would like to do business with government agencies? And it was really interesting what came back. Pardon me. The number one thing that came back was there's a fair degree of frustration among government buyers about a fundamental lack of understanding that companies have about how to do business with them through their regulations, whether it be federal, state, or local, and understanding the processes that they need to follow for procurement and the RFX process. So that really was surprising to me that that would be the overwhelming thing that would come back. But thinking in retrospect, it probably shouldn't surprise anyone that, more than 6 out of 10 people who responded said, well, we really want you to invest more in understanding we can do this, but we can't do that. We have different purchasing mechanisms, and here they are. So that's something that came back, as the majority of the responses. This one is very interesting, and it ties into sort of the main point of the survey that we put out. 1 in 5 basically or simply said, you should bid on relevant RFPs. Now, they said that in different ways. It could have been, well, hey, you need to get on this list to hear about the bids, or you need to know that we're posting our, contracting initiatives on this website, and you should pay attention to those. But they're simply indicating, well, you need to know what is out for bid and simply bid on things that feel relevant to you. And that came back from 1 out of every 5, or slightly more than 1 out of every 5 respondents. 11.5% of the respondents recommended, again, in various forms, because this was an open-ended question, 11.5% said some form of network with government buyers. So that would be like, calling when there's not a bid process, knowing who the CIO, who's filling the CIO role in different government organizations, going to networking events where government people might be who have, the direct responsibility for some of the tech initiatives, Jackson, in your example. So that came up. And it was interesting to me that nearly twice as many people said, well, you need to bid on RFPs, right? So you would not qualify for every tech opportunity, but certainly being aware of what's out there. And I always think of this joke, and it sort of relates to bidding on relevant RFPs and having awareness of them. And the joke goes something like this. There's a guy who would lay in bed every night. He was having financial difficulty, and he kept praying that he would win the lottery. And every night for weeks, he would just say a prayer that to help him out of his financial difficulties, he would say, please, please help me win the lottery. And he did that for a period of weeks. Then one night, all of a sudden, there was a voice. Why don't you buy a ticket? And that sort of encapsulates the same idea here. There are lots of companies that are afraid or they have concerns about, jumping into the pool, so to speak, in terms of government contracting. One good way to get feedback for companies that are new to the game is to submit some offers and see what happens, right? You'll get feedback. You can do debriefings after the bid process and learn all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if you're not bidding, it's not possible to win. Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take, and that certainly applies here. So, and then everything else that came back was under 5% or 1 to 5% of respondents. So some folks mentioned pricing is important. Some other folks mentioned publishing good marketing materials. So they might mention, checking out your website, right? Just looking at your website and making a value judgment. Having a good capability statement. If you're competing for federal contracts, that certainly came up. Researching competitors. And I want to look at that one in relation to pricing RFXs competitively. And I just want to point out that you can get the information for pricing of bids and what your competitors are doing with pricing and researching what they're saying in their bids through the open records laws in different states. And Jackson, I know you're on mute right now, but are you familiar with that process?
Familiar in certain states. I think it's a little different in a variety, but yeah, we've definitely explored that and dived into it quite a bit here.
Yeah, and so I'm preaching to the choir, but for anyone who's with us today or watching this later, if you are not aware of it, after a bid process, you can ask for and obtain copies of the contract, a copy of the winning proposal, evaluations that might show all of the bidders, subjective information on what they thought about each bidder, and even pricing information by bidder, not just the contracted pricing, but all of the pricing. So that is something that you can do on your own. We offer a tool through the site that lets you do that and be anonymous, right? So that's something our users like. They like getting the information without necessarily having their fingerprints on it. So the last thing that they mentioned, or one of the other things that we wanted to highlight, is they recommended that people take advantage of government procurement resources. So particularly for small businesses, that could be anything from the Apex accelerators, which are the grant-based hubs, incubation hubs that they have at different universities and different locations around the country that are federally funded. So you can take advantage of those resources to learn about the different purchasing mechanisms that might be available at the federal level if it's an Apex accelerator. But certainly state and local organizations will have resources for contractors to help steer them in the right direction as far as what they need to know. So I'm just going to stop there and check and see if we have questions. I don't see anyone with a hand raised. I'm just going to encourage anyone who's with us, raise your hand if you would like to join us. Jessica, I'm going to bring you in a moment. But if there are no questions, what I'm going to do is jump right into the next slide. And this starts to get to the crux of the survey, Jackson. And this has to do with buyers and their preferences for known vendors. So the question was, how often do you prefer selecting vendors you may have interacted with in any way before the bid process? And the key word here is preference. What do they want to happen, right? And so that's the way the question was designed. And here's what came back. So it doesn't surprise us, and we have the same pie chart gremlin here. It doesn't surprise us that for 1.3% of the respondents and 18.7% of the others, it's either all of the time or most of the time. So about 20% of the time, you're dealing with someone that really wants to hire somebody who they knew in advance, who did some pre-marketing to them. And that shouldn't surprise anyone here, right? Because that is certainly a big part of how to be successful in GovCon, is making sure they know who you are. The fact that it's only 20% in the purple and orange, that's a little surprising to me. The 44% that said some of the time, that's sort of, maybe sometimes it's important, maybe sometimes it's not. Maybe what they're saying there is for particular types of things, it might be more important. And Jackson, in your business, if it has to do with trust and things of that nature, it might be more important. And so even though 44% of the respondents are saying some of the time, you might be in that 44% that should really be in the orange or the purple, where they want to know who you are. But in other businesses or other tech purchases, it just may not be that important. The most interesting number on this slide to me is that 36% who could care less, who have zero preference for whether or not someone market it to them in advance and if they knew who the vendor was prior to the bid process. So I'm just going to stop there. And Jackson, I wonder if you could react to this.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting. I mean, I think I'm sure there's quite a few factors that go into that none of the time. I'm curious, is there a breakdown in terms of the solicitations you got back or the answers you got back between the EDU and kind of those various categories?
Great question. What is in the report itself, which is not in these slides, we had some demographic questions. One was federal, state, and local.
Mhm.
One was years of experience. And the third was what are some of the purchase sizes that you've been involved in? So there are granular data tables in the report for this question and a few other questions that show that breakout.
Great.
And we didn't really see, now I'm not referring to a particular line item, but in general, the granular data tables that broke things out were not really that different from this. Now, if you looked at state only or federal only, you might see the red area was 20% instead of 36%, but then you would see state and local might be 45% in the red pie chart. So that's available for download and just for anyone who is, I don't think I mentioned this, it is a free download. And I'm going to put the link to the download in the chat here in a moment. So yeah, so that is all in the report, Jackson.
And Nick, a follow-up question too. And you might have covered this in the very beginning of the webinar, but how many years have you been doing this type of surveys and report, and has this fluctuated over the time? Like, have you seen these numbers differentiate throughout the last X amount of years?
Great question. And I want to do a different share here to answer your question in a roundabout way. How do I let's see here. Okay. So do you see that I've changed my screen here?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the first time we've done this survey.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm showing this screen is I'm going to put a link to this as well. This is a gentleman by the name of Mike Lejeune, and he operates RSM Federal, which is a consulting company. And he has a book coming out. I think it's next week, maybe the 24th or the 26th. I'm new to government contracting. Where should I start? As a segue to answer your question, this is our first year doing this kind of report, but Mike has another book coming out that I am co-authoring where I am writing one chapter in the book, and Mike is having several different people in our industry write one chapter in the book. And what I've decided to do is write about the survey, but with a lot of editorial comments around it.
Mhm.
So this is our first time. It won't be our last, but I'm just going to go ahead and drop this link into the chat. Let me see if I can do that. To everyone. So that's one. And then I want to just link to the report. And that's the other. So the first link is to sign up not only to hear about the release of Mike's book coming out next week, but secondarily, if you sign up for that, and that's just, name and email address, you will hear about the later release of the book where I write a lot critically editorializing the content of the survey itself. So thanks for that question, Jackson. I want to see if we have a question in the Q&A. Okay, so Andrea asks a question, and I'm going to read the question, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Andrea doesn't have access to the AV portion to let her participate. She wants to see if we can expand on pre-marketing because her company is new to government bidding and didn't even know that was a thing. Okay, so here's the basic idea, and Jackson, feel free to chime in on this as well. As someone who has had a career in not only GovCon sales, but also corporate sales, think of it this way. Selling in government is no different than the private sector, but for that bureaucratic layer that involves the procurement and RFP process, right? So fundamentally, there are people who prefer to do business with other people that they know. Andrea, I might have this. It looks like I think you're in the security business, and I see that from the sign up here. So different businesses may have a greater need than others to press the flesh. So if I think of the security guard business, and if there's a government building that needs to have 24 by 7 by 365 security people at a desk, I view that more as a commodity than perhaps Jackson's business, where he has unique technology solutions that involve, sensitive data and who's doing the programming and where are these resources located, right? And so there's a lot of trust issues there. Now, you would have background checks and issues around the specific people, but by and large, I would tend to think that a contract for security guard services is a little bit more of a commodity purchase than something that's a complicated tech purchase. The reason why I point this out is that I believe that there's a correlation there. And that correlation is the more complex the sale, the more expensive the sale, the more important the pre-marketing is. And let's just clarify what we mean by pre-marketing. Pre-marketing means identifying who are the people involved in the decision making, right? Because it's not typically just going to be a person whose name is on the RFP, right? So there's one person who's responsible for the administrative process. That person may have significant decision-making contributions to the process, but that's not the only person. So the more expensive or elaborate your solution is that you're providing to a government agency, the more you have to figure out who are all the decision makers, do they know who you are, and do they value anything that's unique about what you're offering? You have the ability, if you do all this before a bid process starts, you have the ability to make recommendations to these buyers about what requirements they should put into their bid process. Even at the federal level, they have something called a sources sought notice. And so a sources sought notice at the federal level, they'll put out something that says, well, we're thinking about buying security guard services for this, regular security military or government facility, federal government facility, and we want to outsource it. We want to know if there are small businesses that are capable of doing this. So you have the ability to respond to that deadline with a document that says, well, we can do it. We're a small business. We can respond to it. And by the way, I don't know if you're a small business, but in that sources sought response, you have the ability to make recommendations about what are some of the requirements that they should consider. So that would be an example of pre-marketing at the federal level if a federal government agency publishes what they call a sources sought notice. So Andrea, I'm going to encourage you to feel free to type some follow-up questions, and you can put them in the chat as well, Andrea, so everyone can see the question. That works too. So hopefully that answers your question, and we'll come back to you if you have a follow-up. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slides. And let's go back into full screen mode, maybe. I think I can do that. Okay, so now this gets beyond the preference part of the previous slide. So now we're not focused on what the person prefers. We're asking them to tell us, well, forget about what your preference is. What actually happens? And when we were putting this survey together, it occurred to me that you could get some of this information and take the respondent out of it by doing open records requests, but you would never ultimately know if company A was known by different people. Even if you started asking for documents, that wouldn't always tell you what you wanted to know. So the only way you can know this is by asking the perception of the people who actually make these decisions. So the question we asked about the reality of what comes out of all of these bid processes is, how often are you involved in purchasing decisions where you had no awareness of the company selected until the bid process started? And here's what came back. And here's our gremlin in the pie chart. I'm presenting this in SharePoint and not natively in PowerPoint. I suspect that's the issue. So when we asked that question, 8% of the people that who responded said, it never happens, none of the time. It never happens that we hire someone where we had no awareness of the company until the bid process started. That doesn't surprise me. And actually, I thought it would be higher than that, right? But at 8%, it is what it is. The largest is some of the time, right? So that's the gray area, Jackson. And that, again, there are within that 62% number, there are certainly instances where it does happen that they knew the company they selected before the bid process. But they're saying in that 62%, there are many purchases in that 62% where it does happen, right? So it's a little bit of a gray area, and that's the biggest portion. But the most interesting parts of the pie chart would be the orange and the purple. So most of the time and all of the time. So just shy of 30% of the time, buyers are admitting they're hiring companies most of the time or all of the time where they personally had no awareness of the company before the bid process started. And I just want to tell a story real quick to sort of put a fine point on this idea. We had a woman who worked in our organization several years ago, and she is now the director of supplier diversity for a pretty well-known utility company, and she's going to be a host on a future session of MyGovWatch Live. She told us her first job was working the front desk at a local school district near our town here in New Jersey. And she said every week, someone would drop 15 copies of proposals on her desk, architectural services, janitorial services, infrastructure products, whatever it may be. And they would say to this young lady, here are 15 proposals. Pick 5 that look good to you. And so the point there is that there are so many things happening in procurement, busy procurement departments in government. I would not go around assuming that there's always someone on the inside of every sale, right? Now, again, the more complex the sale, the higher dollar value of the sale, certainly there is a greater likelihood chance that someone is behind the scenes saying, hey, here's what you should put in the bid. Here's some of the requirements that you might put in. But by and large, there's not a Jack for every Jill, meaning there's not always a vendor who is quietly and surreptitiously in the background likely to win the contract. It looks like at least 30% of it, or about 30% of the time, they had no idea of the company before the bid process even started. So Jackson, I'm just going to stop there. I'm going to take a drink. I'm going to see if there's questions, and we'll see if you can react to that.
Would love to see those RFPs, those proposal responses.
When you say you'd love to see the responses, what do you mean?
The ones that they don't have relationships with them. I mean, what to these procurement folks is really standing out? What's getting them excited? I'm sure pricing is a consideration, could be relevant. Hey, we've worked with X department in X city, and maybe they have positive feelings toward them, or whatever it might be. But the structure of the proposals, really interesting to hear this, especially for that story that you said of your coworker who selected the 5 proposals. Like, what stands out? What gets folks excited?
Yeah, so I would go back to the open records process, and if you haven't done this yet, and you could do this through our site, or maybe your company has a list of things they bid on in the past. And I would get copies of winning proposals, whether it's through us or if you do that follow up yourself, and you will have that answer, right? If you were to get 3 to 5 winning proposals for things that your company lost in the last 2 years, you'll get a pretty good idea of what's been working, and you'll have a very good idea of what your competitors are saying in their bids. Now, you mentioned pricing, and I realize this is going to be on YouTube later, so I don't want to ask anything that's too specific, but like, what are some of the reasons why prospects in your business would pick company A versus B or C?
I think I mean it does go to the influencing of the deal a bit. I think showcasing potential longevity of it. I think it also they might be willing to bid higher or secure a higher deal if there's more of a long-term partner that's going to be helping iterate, more of that agile approach. I think versus and then the other big one would probably be implementation. If you have a team, maybe an agency with decent amount of turnover or whatever it might be, it could be difficult to spend high, if folks might not be there very long, or if it's going to take years and years to implement. So I think those are potentially two large reasons.
Sure. Well, I just invited Jessica on with us, and Jessica, I'm not sure if you can join us. I just sent you a request to bring you on as a panelist. Let me just see here if I can get to that part of the. So Jessica, I don't know if you can hear me or if you're attentive, but I'm inviting you on as a panelist. And at this time, I would also ask anyone who's with us, if you would like to ask a question or participate in any way, even just to introduce your business and tell us what you're trying to achieve in government contracting, or what you think some of your pain points might be in government contracting, now would be a good time to raise your hand, and I will just bring you on to participate in some way and talk about what your issues are. Short of that, Jackson, it's me and you. And sometimes it's we've had as few as 15 or 20 people on these sessions where we can't get off the line in 2 hours. We've had other sessions where we've had 40 or 50 people, and it's like pulling teeth getting questions. So Jackson, I have one more slide with a call to action, but do you have some additional comments or questions?
I think this is going to be. It's definitely been pretty helpful. Very interesting to see. I wonder. I mean, I think it's tough without years of experience, but I wonder with a lot of these of, hey, we haven't heard of them and we've brought them on. I wonder, post-COVID world, in this new world that we're living, if those numbers have changed greatly, especially that there's less of that walking the halls type of interaction and physical events. I'm just curious to see how these things have changed and potentially what may change in the next few years as those events start to open back up. So but it's really interesting to see, and I'm excited to dive into the report more.
Well, and I'm bringing on someone who would like to join us, and you said something I want to come back to, but first I want to welcome Alex, and Alex is joining us, and let's just see if we can get Alex to Alex, do we have your audio at least?
Yep. How's it going, Nick?
Hey, welcome, Alex. Welcome to MyGovWatch Live. Alex, what do you do and where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from Boston, Massachusetts, and I am a business development liaison at Dane Street, which is a independent medical review company. And if we had another 2 hours on the call, I could probably explain to you the business model. But similar to Jackson, kind of been learning more on the go about government contracting. We've had a couple wins in terms of, some of the SLED or state and local stuff, and more exploring the federal marketplace. And, one of the things that Jackson said that kind of resonated with me was I'd love to see some of those, RFPs, and, someone who's, constantly looking at some of these federal opportunities and what it takes to go after them, and the goals that the federal government has for small businesses and, minority women-owned businesses is, the amount of effort it's going to take us to respond to a bid when we don't have any federal wins under our belt, or, what is the actual likelihood here? And I know the survey was helpful, but what can we do to, increase our chances, and whether that's starting as a sub vendor. And, what we would call is, we've done very well in the commercial space, kind of like we first said, hey, we need to hit a couple singles to start getting some bigger wins. And now we're starting to think maybe we need some sacrifice bunts, basically doing the work at very little of a profit, but, not losing money, but by no means is it going to be something that, is a big revenue generator for us. How often do you guys see companies go into the federal space and say, hey, listen, we got to just get a couple, whether we're a sub or something like that under our belt. And then, eventually after, a couple of years start, being the prime vendor.
Well, Alex, you said a mouthful, but I want to just give you a compliment. Everything you just said, and I want to use your baseball analogy, everything you just said tells me you're in the ballpark, because you're already mentioning subcontracting. You're mentioning different things that tell me you have a fundamental awareness and understanding that this is not necessarily the easiest thing you'll ever do, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. So have you, and just, I want to make sure I heard this correctly. Right now, we're talking about federal contracting. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have state and local contracts?
We do.
Okay. All right. And is this, so this is a service that you're offering?
Yeah, correct. Long story short, the product is a report by an independent physician on how to handle a claim. So we do workers' compensation, disability. We work with a lot of the big, health insurance carriers in the commercial space.
And this is something that you're seeing, and you've won contracts at the state and local level for this very service.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, it seems, pardon me, pretty likely that that there would be federal opportunities around this. Have you seen any that look exactly like what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I'd use the word exactly, kind of like, it's, yes. I mean, we can perform the work, but we don't know what we don't know.
Sure,
And
sure.
there's
Well,
some larger ones. Yeah, go ahead.
and you mentioned small business. Have you done the research at the federal level to know whether or not you are a small business in that NAICS code?
Yeah, so we're not. We've explored the fact of working with somebody who has federal experience, who in terms of revenue is significantly smaller than we are, but because they're a woman-owned business, we could go in as a sub, but we know that we're a larger company, which allows us to do some things from a price point. So the question is, do we go in as a sub, even though theoretically we would probably be the prime without the title?
Well,
And that's one of the things we're because they're going to be able to squeeze us, we're not going to be able
yeah.
to squeeze them.
Well, I have some good news for you. I'm just going to give you another, there's always another acronym, isn't there, Alex? I'm going to give you another acronym, and I want you to tell me, is this an acronym that's come up? Have you heard this in federal parlance? An MPA, as in Mentor-Protégé Agreement.
No.
Okay. So here's the gist of the Mentor-Protégé Program. You mentioned that there's a potential teaming partner with you, and you mentioned that it's a woman-owned business. Do you know that if it's a small business?
I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, all right. So assuming this woman-owned business is a small business, you said they're significantly smaller than you. There is an SBA program that's been out there maybe 4 years, 5 years, where company A is able to mentor company B. So even though in your case, let's call you company A. Company B has federal contracts. Is that right?
Correct. They're
Okay.
also on PSA, and we're not.
Okay. Okay. So, however, you are a much larger organization, which implies greater sophistication, right?
Correct.
Okay. You can form a mentor-protege agreement that's recognized with the SBA, in which you're agreeing to provide expertise to party B. If there is a procurement, you are able to joint venture with party B as a small business, getting the advantage of being a small business, getting the advantage of being a woman-owned small business, but getting a disproportionate and doing a disproportionate amount of the work through the JV. It's extremely slick. The SBA came up with it as a way of encouraging larger organizations to partner with smaller organizations, and it sounds like something you should definitely look into.
Absolutely, yeah. I had not heard of that. So
It's a big one. It's a big one. And when you Google it, you'll see all kinds of stuff come up. And we certainly know people who can help you with that. Attorneys, we work with the Co-Prince law firm out of Kansas. They're nationally known for doing this kind of thing. But yeah, so obviously we're talking about a lot of different stuff here. I'm sure that helps. But like, what other follow-up questions come from that?
I mean, I think a lot of it is just being kind of, looking which is unique to our industry, and I don't want to take it offline, but looking at, do we need to basically open up kind of, or put some type of curtain up and say, there's Dane Street commercial and Dane Street federal. Like, we've used some of our commercial references and some of our big state bids. Some of them we've won, some of them we have not. And sometimes they've cited the fact that commercial references hurt us, and sometimes they've cited the fact that they didn't really mind the commercial references. So it's a mixed bag, but we have done that before. So some of the feedback we've gotten, we've used a ton of consultants, and just said, some of our competitors who have entered this space have basically kind of put up a curtain, so to speak, and said, we're going to call this, whatever, ABC federal, and there's going to be, something between them. So just another thing that comes up, how common do you see a company kind of, splitting, so to speak,
Yeah, so I would say this, based on what I'm hearing, you have significant state and local references for exactly what we're talking about. You have significant corporate references for exactly what we're talking about. I do not necessarily see a reason why you would, quote unquote, split off or carve out something just to pursue federal. I see no reason why you would not just simply compete, under your current banner, because you have the corporate and other government experience. It's all past performance. And so what would be the benefit of carving something out? Like, I'm not sure why you're going, why would you be considering that?
Well, it's a kind of a tough area to go into, but I think especially in the Medicare and Medicaid space,
Okay.
there can be a conflict of interest if you're working with commercial,
Okay. Okay.
like a Blue Cross Blue Shield or any type of big, so like it's tough to dive into, and frankly, I don't have the legal background to explain it, but based on some of the consulting we've done, we've gotten a little bit of feedback there. Again, nothing, that's,
right.
100%.
And I've heard of different conflicts that there can be in different contracting initiatives in a certain type of business. So I'm familiar with that concept. I will tell you that there is a concept federally called affiliation. Have you heard this concept?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I know I'm familiar with the word.
Okay. So affiliation would be, company A creates an entity for the purposes of eliminating a conflict. But if company A has the ability to control company B, the federal regulations recognize that they're really the same organization. So if you want to create a new entity, just realize that that is something, that you would want to look into as well.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate it, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just going to, by the way, I have another hour set aside. I don't see a whole lot of questions. Alex, Jackson, other questions, other things that you might like me to address here before we start to draw things down. And by the way, we do this every month.
I don't have anything that pops to mind right away, but certainly you know, start joining these more frequently.
Yeah, yeah, we
Certainly,
do it.
certainly
It's
appreciate
promotional, but and again, I typically have a co-host on. We had the attorney firm that I mentioned on last month, but we'll have other consultants like Mike Lejeune was on in January. Sometimes we'll have people from the Apex Accelerator community. Those are the programs that are funded federally to help people figure out federal contracting. So I encourage people to sign up for any number of other events that we have advertised on the homepage, but I'm just going to leave it with a call to action here before we see if there's any last minute questions people have. And the call to action is to download the full report to read about whether buyers typically hire firms they already do business with. So I kept out of this presentation a question that we asked around incumbency. That's available in the report if you download it. Where buyers feel it's difficult to find vendors. So they mentioned some things about federal contracting. They mentioned some things about different industries, and I've already mentioned technology in general is something where they feel like it's hard to find vendors. They also mention niche types of services. So it may be, Alex, that you offer something that's extremely niche, and that's the kind of thing that they feel like it's difficult to find vendors. And I think I might have already mentioned this. Anyone who starts a free trial on our site on the same day as downloading the report, their 2-week trial becomes a 3-week trial. And if you do it within 4 hours, it's a 4-week or 1-month trial. So, folks, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this afternoon. I think I have one more question here, so we're gonna field that question. And again, I have plenty of time, folks. So anyone who wants to raise their hand, we will bring you on, or you can just type the question. But Andrea asks, when is the best time to do an open records request? After the bid is awarded or before to get some information on the incumbent? And what information should we be looking for, and how long does it generally take to receive? Great questions. So there are two kinds of purchases, Andrea. There are what we would call spot purchases or one-time purchases, right? That could be like for a dump truck or for a service that is not necessarily a recurring service. That would be one type of purchase, a one-off. Then there are regular recurring term contracts for things that the government buys over and over and over every 3 to 5 years. So if it's a one-off purchase, there is no prior activity involving that purchase. So it's not like they're, you know, if they're buying a dump truck, there's not necessarily a purchase from 3 years ago where you can see the pricing on who sold them the dump truck. However, if it's a recurring term contract and you want to get the results of a current bid process, they're not required to comply with your open records request until after the contract is inked. So that's something that we have built into our process if someone has us do it. But so at that point, you're only asking, you know, for the information related to the bid process after contracts are signed, which we wouldn't even recommend following up until 3 months after the bid due date. And maybe they've awarded the contract and signed one, or maybe they haven't. And if it is a term contract, realize that you have, you know, cycle 1 in 2024, and they're buying that service today, but maybe, you know, a few years before 2019 or 2017, they had the same process. You can ask for the information from that process, and it may still have relevancy to a process that they're about to start. So the best case scenario is if you're selling something that is a term contract and you know they're going out for bid for it in a year or so, get that information now. It might take you 6 months. We follow up, you know, every month, and a lot of times people lose track of it, and that's why they engage with us is too. It's not just the anonymity. They don't like having to follow up because it takes forever. So if when you know a bid is coming out a year from now, getting it from the prior bid process is highly valuable. And it can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months, depending on the level of government and how, whether you follow the correct process, ask for the right information, because there's a lot in terms of what they're allowed to give out and what they're not. So you have to do it in the right way and ask for the right things. Or something that would normally take 3 months might take 9, or you may not get it at all. So hopefully that answers your question there. And at that, I'm just going to see if we have other questions. Okay, we have no open questions. We've gone through the content. Let me stop the share. And so we're back. Jackson, I want to appreciate you. I just want to say thank you for joining us. We can certainly be in touch if you have other questions for me or if you want to talk about trying our site. So if you have nothing else, then I'll dismiss you and I'll read a little outro and then we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Nick. Sounds great. Really appreciate this time.
Yep. Thank you. So folks, I'm just going to finish here with our outro. So don't forget to download a copy of the report. Thank you for joining today's edition of MyGovWatch Live. And remember, if you're not already a subscriber, start your free 14-day trial of MyGovWatch today. If you want to win more government contracts for less, you'll be glad you did. And thanks, folks.